Have you ever had a memory so heavy it felt like it lived in the room with you? Like it wasn't just in your mind, but in the air and the walls surrounding you and every place that you are? That's how the trauma in Beloved by Toni Morrison is used. It isn't just a metaphor. It's the feeling becomes real. It becomes flesh. It became beloved. Hi, I'm Kinsley, and today I'll be covering the argument that Beloved uses magical realism to write about the trauma she struggled with during slavery and loss of her child, further suggesting that Beloved uses magical realism to reframe historical memory entirely. And we'll also be pulling ideas from a few scholars like Coonrad, Moglen, and Watson, and even from a Harper's Bazaar article on Latin magical realism to round out the bigger picture of what the magical actually was in literature. So it utilizes magical realism not only as a literary genre, but also as a means of making trauma of slavery visible and impossible to ignore. Morrison uses magical realism in Beloved to give physical form to trauma, the scars that carry from slavery and from the loss of her child, and from memories that she simply cannot escape. Magical realism reframes historical memory so that the past doesn't live inside of an individual, but it haunts the world itself. And I'm going to give you all the definition of magical realism right there, boom, right there. Magical realism is a genre which supernatural events occur in the realistic world, but they are treated as normal. And that's extremely important because magical realism often deals with political trauma and things too big, too violent, too unspeakable, or uncomfortable for realism alone to handle. Scholar Ger Watson explains this about magical realism by engaging socio-political themes, common motifs, and allegorical interpretations. Morrison is also doing that by taking a fantasy world shaped by real history, real pain, slavery, and giving it psychological. Beloved appears at 124. She eats, breathes, and demands, and she hungers. That's the magic of magical realism. And as Helene Molen writes, Morrison radically interrogates the fantastic tradition. This book really pushes that Beloved isn't a simple case of trauma, but that she is the trauma with a heartbeat. That's why her line, I need her, she's mine. Beloved, she's mine. I am beloved and she is mine. On page 247, clock it, hits so extremely hard because at that point it has itself claiming Seath. And this quote is so important because it really shows how much of an identity she has lost because of her grief and trauma and slavery. Kaya. She realizes in this part of the story that she is beloved, and beloved is not only just a ghost, but is a part of herself, or at least that's my interpretation. Beloved does magical realism so flawlessly. When the ghost shows up, first as a baby spirit shaking the house, later as a full-grown woman, nobody reacts like they're in a horror movie. Denver Seth is like, oh hey girl, is relieved that she's gotten like a long-lost sibling back, and Paul D is like really the only one who kind of freaks out. But even then, he doesn't really question whether it's real. He just questions whether he like is annoyed or like wants it to stay. This is classical magical realism. The impossible appears, but the world doesn't crumble. It doesn't stop. Morrison it just continues. Isn't using magic to escape reality. She's using it to expose normal reality to try to hide and to use it as like an escape. Here's a quote, in my opinion, unlocks everything and truly defines the theme or the moral of the book. Places are still there. Even if a house burns down, it's gone, but the picture of it stays. Even if I die, the picture, it's still there in the world. Page 43. Here Seath is explaining memory, which is way more than just remembering. She says that even in a house, if it disappears, the place remains. That's precisely what magical realism is all about. She says that the past doesn't live just in the mind, but in the real world for someone to walk right into it. Morrison literalizes this idea to show how trauma is not only in the mind, but it's environmental and it's in the real world. It reshapes landscapes, it lingers just like a ghost. This quote is so important because it's really the theme that's shown throughout the book, that trauma lingers and it haunts you. That Morrison creates a unfamiliar reality to force readers to face the horrific consequences of slavery. Consequences that don't fade with time. And that's really what rememory is. It's a haunting that's also history. Nicole Coonrad's article, To Be Loved, Amy Denver, A Human Need, and Toni Morrison's Beloved. It's a journal article that I found on JSTART. It talks about a whole other angle, and it argues that at the core of the novel, beneath all the haunting and all the pain, is a human need for recognition, affection, and connection, and more so identity, which was a big struggle with slavery in that time. And it hits hard when you look at Beloved herself. She comes back and she needs Seath's love, but Seath, in all of her trauma, she needs Beloved, and so they kind of just need each other. And this mutual hunger becomes dangerous and parasitic, especially as Beloved literally becomes consuming Seath's time, energy, food, and identity. Coonrad also helps us see that this isn't just possession, it's a result of a wound so deep that both characters are starving for something that they've never fully had. This is my tortoise, and in the next section, we'll be talking about how healing isn't linear, basically. Morrison shows us that resurrection isn't redemption, and that it doesn't bring peace, but instead brings pain. Beloved's return seems to reopen wounds that she had healed shut, because healing isn't linear. It's painful, it's confrontation, it's real. This is why Morrison uses supernatural realism other than straight realism, because trauma doesn't come back logically or cleanly. It comes back in nightmares, flashbacks, sudden intrusions, in ways that feel supernatural or magical. Hence, magical realism, and that it basically mirrors the lived psychological reality. As Moglen argues, Morrison uses the fantastic to challenge conventional ideas of identity and selfhood, basically relating to Cited and Beloved and the possession aspect. Beloved returns to stabilize her sense of reality, and the destabilization is part of her path towards confronting what she survived. The past is haunting.
Magical realism makes that fight visible and reminds us that trauma is not abstract, but it's embodied, it's emotional, historical, and communal. Morrison uses Beloved, which goes to show that America is still must reckon with the legacy of slavery and practice resistance. When we talk about Beloved, we're not talking about a simple ghost story. We're talking about a memory story, a trauma. Morrison doesn't use magical realism to escape reality, but rather to convey the truth in a way that realism just cannot alone. Beloved, as in a metaphor, is the past and is a wound and is a reminder that what happened does not stay buried. When you put all these scholars together, you get a powerful understanding of why Beloved couldn't just be a realist historical novel. Watson shows us that magical realism shows the impossible to feel true. Moglen shows us that Morrison uses this form to reclaim history and to challenge silences, and Coonrat highlights the human yearning beneath the magic, the need to be loved, remembered, recognizing, and Harper's Bazaar article reminds us that magical realism comes from cultures marked by trauma, displacement, and the blending of past and present. In Beloved, the magical is the only language big enough to hold the trauma of slavery, the magical aspect. In Beloved, the magical aspect is the only language big enough to hold the trauma of slavery. It is the only form that lets the dead return, not for horror, but for healing. Even if that healing is messy, painful, and incomplete, magical realism doesn't hide trauma, it makes it visible. It puts it right in the room with you, and it demands you to see it. And in doing that, Beloved becomes more than just a novel. It becomes a ritual of remembering, a ceremony of things history tried to erase. Alright friends, that's it today. Thank you for coming with me on a deep dive of magical realism and trauma and Beloved, and a few journal articles I have researched, and a Harper's Bazaar article. If you found this helpful, hit the like button, subscribe, drop a comment, let me know what other books or articles you want me to break down. And if you want to know the sources or my works cited page, it is in the description below. And thank you for watching. Bye, Kinslinators. Say bye.